You've been told this book is named after a long odds football pass. It isn't. It's about something else entirely. And when I explain it to you, it's going to change how you see the book. Hi, I'm Dave Butler. Welcome back to High Low Brow, because culture matters and I want to have fun. I'm going to talk to you today about a novel that is currently, whose film version is currently in theaters. And tell you, I think at least three reasons that this novel is really good, and the movie I think does a really faithful job, not to the letter, but to the spirit of capturing the themes in the books. The novel and movie, I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to great, but highly recommended, certainly among sort of current offerings out there. So the first thing I want to say, not everyone watching this may be a longtime aficionado of the science fiction fantasy scene. So let me make a comment about science fiction. There is a kind of science fiction which some longtime fans of a maybe slightly snootier and crunchier disposition will say, well, that's what you're talking about, Dave, is real science fiction. And others may refer to as hard science fiction. And this is an example of it. This is I would say hard SF, hard science fiction. And this is interesting. So, let me tell you what it is, and then tell you why it's interesting. And I think even actually laudable and an encouraging sign. The success of the book, the success of Andy Weir and his career are an encouraging sign in the science fiction fantasy scene. The way to get at this is to say, maybe in the first case, that Star Wars is not science fiction. How do I know? Because people have magic powers. So it's not science fiction. Hard science fiction or science, science fiction properly speaking, is stories in which somehow solving a science problem, or maybe an engineering problem, or a series of science and engineering problems matters to the book, or in which there is a what if, and the what if is a science-driven what if. Okay, so an example of a hard science fiction novel might be Larry Niven's Ringworld, which we may talk about later on this show. But the Ringworld asks a kind of a thought experiment, which is, and it's sort of a far future hard SF novel, but it's trying to ask a serious thought experiment, which is, what would it be like if you could engineer a ribbon which entirely surrounds a star at a distance from it approximately equal to Earth's distance from the sun, and you terraformed the inside. In other words, what if you made a world that wasn't a sphere orbiting, but a ribbon circling a planet, and the entire interior was, had mountains and rivers, and what would that look like? And what would be sort of the logical consequences in that setting, right? That's a sort of a what if science kind of question. Hard science fiction hard SF was pretty quiet. People, you're going to go, no, so-and-so, yeah. But it was pretty quiet by the early aughts. And it was very interesting that, so I think it's telling, Andy's first novel, The Martian, he couldn't sell. So traditional publishing, this will sound critical. I don't mean it to be critical. I just mean to describe it. Like Hollywood, traditional publishing companies want a safe bet, right? Especially if they're going to bet a lot of money. They want to invest in editing and printing and marketing a book where they know they're going to sell a lot, right? This is why if Shaquille O'Neal ever writes a middle grade book about whatever, he's going to sell it for $10 million, right? Because he's Shaquille O'Neal, and they're going to sell a whole bunch of copies. And if they have to hire someone to rewrite it, every single word, they will. This is why, if J.K. Rowling turns in a, sweet Amish romance trilogy, it will get published, right? Publishing wants to make safe bets, and they chase trends. And so, and B follows from A, right? So when, one vampire romance novel makes it over the wall and is a gigantic bestseller, a whole bunch of vampire romance novels follow for a couple of years until they feel like the market is burned out, and then they all stop publishing vampire romance novels. And so for a couple of years, if that's what you happen to be selling, you're going to have no problem. And then as soon as editors decide the trend is over, which, by the way, because of the publication schedule of traditional publishing is a year or more before readers might think it's over, it'll be impossible to sell a vampire romance novel, right? So it was impossible to sell hard science fiction. The conventional wisdom was people don't want to read this. There aren't novels, there aren't movies, there aren't TV shows. Yeah, you're going to say this guy, that guy, but they're just obscure or just, those are just individual exceptions that sort of test the rule, right? Andy Weir self-published The Martian and did really well, and then he got offered, and I think it's Penguin Random House, I forget exactly what imprint, published The Martian, made the movie, etc., right? So it's nice. It's nice. Speaking of a guy who cares about, as a guy who cares about literature, it's nice when there is a current trend that's not irritating. Okay, and hard science fiction is cool. And Andy's novels have been the three, right? Have been near future hard science fiction. So it's not imagining, hey, what if we had a ring world? It's imagining a world where people are still using, TikTok because it's only 5 years in the future and they have to solve some kind of a problem, right? Trapped astronaut, murder mystery on the moon. And in this case, the story, and I should probably say at this point that I probably will say spoilers. So maybe go watch the movie or read the book first if you're worried about that. The story, now, look, there's always somewhere in the story going to be a leap of faith, a made-up thing, right? And the made-up thing here are the astrophages. This is a single-celled organism that is capable of storing immense amounts of energy and then releasing it as light so that it can move, and in fact, it can move around in space. And the problem is that it gets that energy by basically eating the life out of a star, not to extinction, but significantly reducing the energy, the light and heat that a star is putting off. And so these things appear in our solar system, and they are migrating back and forth in a line between Venus and the sun, and feeding and reproducing, all of which is their natural life cycle, but it's draining the sun. Why is that a problem? Well, because we discover this is happening. We think that our temperature on Earth is going to drop 10 to 15 degrees, which means ice age, and it's actually very interesting, kind of thoughtful. While a small group of humans with current technology could probably fairly easily survive the ice age, the problems that result from reduced agriculture, and then there'll be competition among nation states for the diminished resources, are expected to kill off a lot of people because of famine and then war and disruption of trade and all that stuff. Right? This is discovered, looming catastrophe, and then it's a thought experiment. How would we solve this? Right, and throughout the story, the main character, who is a scientist, he's a sort of a PhD who got kicked out of the academy and is teaching middle school science, solves science and engineering problems, and a number of these center around the fictitious astrophage, right? But it's in the nature of, well, given this organism and a reasonable modern set of tools, how would he solve this challenge? So it's thinking literature. It's pro-human. It's pro science and engineering, at least. I don't know if it has a position on Western civilization per se, except to the extent that modern science and engineering are a result or fruits of Western civilization. So for that alone, I think this is Andy's career is remarkable, and this is a remarkable novel. I should say, if you watch the movie first and you're going to go read the book, one of the differences is, because I read the book over the weekend, I watched the movie just now. I got out of the theater half an hour ago. is the movie's a pretty faithful adaptation. One of the things that it does, well, it has the challenge that most of the book is just Ryland Grace, the main character, alone on a ship or on a ship with this one alien he meets, trying to solve mental problems, right? And in fact, when he's on Earth, a lot of it is still him trying to solve mental problems. So they took some filmmaker shortcuts, and one of the things they did is they really it was a reasonably funny book, but the movie is funnier. There's probably triple the amount of humor to sort of get through the. You need something, right? A certain amount of the filmmaker trick they use was spectacle. Let me show you alien planet. Oh, cool interior of the ship. By the way, the ship as described and mapped out in the book is simpler than the ship that appears on the screen. There's way more kind of shining widgets and stuff. So the filmmakers are taking some liberties to adapt the story into a good film, but it is a pretty faithful adaptation, and I'll tell you a couple of changes that I think are relevant. But if you've watched the film and go to read the book, just be prepared. It's more thinky, sciencey stuff. In the film, it's a lot of like jump to the conclusion where the book might take 2 pages or 3 or 4 pages to sort of think through what is the challenge, what happened. I do some investigation. I see this. Okay, here's my solution. Right, but I love that it's hard science fiction. I think that's great. Now, thing 2, getting into the theme of the book, and I was quite candidly surprised by this. So I started reading this over the weekend. I got about 3 chapters in, and I hit a line that caused me to Google my question actually was, is Andy Weir Catholic? I Googled that. And I should say, let me take a moment. We're early in the life of this channel. Let me say, this is an ecumenical channel. You believers of all stripes, as well as unbelievers of all stripes, happy to have you. My Catholic brothers and sisters, you are welcome anywhere that I am, okay? But I hit a line that I thought, man, I wonder if Andy's Catholic. And I Googled that question. And, of course, Google no longer just sends you links. It's AI tries to answer, right? As if you have asked the AI a question. And the first thing it said was, no, Andy Weir is an agnostic. Now, man, that may be true, but a person could be Catholic and agnostic. So I sort of, a little suspicious of an overly simple answer. My dubious radar kind of went up. But the second piece of the answer is actually just clearly wrong, because then it went on to gratuitously tell me, okay, the title of the book, Project Hail Mary, is a reference to passes in football, when you pass a really long pass where it's low odds of success, okay? And by the way, that is repeated in the movie, although I don't think it's in the book, but in the movie, when the Ryan Reynolds character meets sort of the cast of diplomats and functionaries and scientists who are trying to solve this problem, someone, what is Project Hail Mary? And someone explains to him it's like the football pass, right? But I think that is, A, it's not in the book. B, I think it's wrong, actually. I think it's demonstrably wrong. Let me show you a couple of reasons why I think that. So page 122 of my copy of the book, scientist gets out there to Tau Ceti, right? The solution is, or when they examine the suns in the neighborhood, they realize that all of the suns have been infected by the astrophages, the sun eaters. They're all dimming except for one. And so they send an expedition that is going to be a suicide mission to this system, Tau Ceti, to do some science and investigate, okay? And what happens is the engineer and the pilot die on the way, and so we're left with just the school teacher scientist alone in this ship. And he pretty quickly finds himself alongside what is obviously an alien ship, or I should say, it quickly becomes obvious it's an alien ship. It isn't immediately obvious. His first thought is, that someone else has sent another ship from Earth, right? And he said maybe Earth sent multiple ships with different designs, because this other ship is much bigger than his, and it's sort of octagonal, where his is a rocket as God and Heinlein intended. Maybe Earth sent multiple ships with different designs, like for redundancy or to increase the odds that at least one works. This is on page 121. Maybe that ship is the praise Allah or the blessings of Vishnu or something. So look, the character sees another ship, and the dialogue in his head, he immediately thinks that ship, if it is also from Earth, is named after an invocation of a divinity. It's named after a prayer, praise Allah or blessings of Vishnu or something, right? Which means he understands the name of his ship, Hail Mary, not as being about a pass, but as being about an invocation of divinity, about being a prayer. The ship is named, it is a prayer, right? It's not a football play. Thing two, and this is the thing that caused me to Google whether Andy Weir is Catholic, which for me is a matter of just pure curiosity, right? It's not one way or the other. The character wakes up. He wakes up, and he's got tubes in him, and he doesn't know where he is, and he doesn't know who he is. And he spends a couple chapters sort of figuring out he's on a spaceship, he's been in a coma, the other astronauts are dead, right? And eventually realizes his name, which is Grace. He's Ryland Grace, okay? Why does this matter? Because he's the only occupant of this interstellar ship, which means the ship is the Hail Mary full of grace, okay? The ship is a prayer. It is not a pass. And, or think of it this way. From the point of view of the human species, okay? So not Dr. Grace's experience, but the story about humanity in this book is that humans are saved by grace after they send up a Hail Mary to the heavens, right? So I don't want to hear about how this book is just named after a football play, Gemini. That is clearly not true. Now, by the way, it's super interesting because over and over again in this book, which remember is hard science fiction. So the character hits an engineering problem and he solves it with a wrench and duct tape and plywood, right? And test tubes and looking at things and putting syringes. This is a story about a scientist. But over and over again, we hear about providence. Now, the word providence doesn't come up. The word grace really just comes up in the character's name. But we get these little, over and over again, coincidences, right? And the author hangs a lantern on some of them. In other words, he not only narrates coincidence, but some of them he has the characters say, ooh, we got lucky. Ooh, what a coincidence, right? And I jotted down, I don't know, just kind of a half dozen in the back of my book, and then I stopped keeping track of them. But like in the first place, it's just sheer good luck that humans realize what's going on. They happen to have a ship out there exploring the interior of the solar system. And I think it's a Japanese Amaterasu class spaceship or something, and that's out there taking readings and is in the right space to see what they call is it the Parlova, the Palova line, something like that. But the line of the sort of infrared radiation that marks where the astrophages are moving back and forth between the sun and Venus, right? Petrova, the Petrova line. So it's sheer luck that they're in the right place to even notice that. So another example of providence at play in the story is that the science officer who's scheduled to be on the flight and the backup both die in an accident. It was an administrative accident. They blow up, right? Because they're supposed to be dispensed this tiny amount of the astrophage to experiment with, and they get 1,000 times too much, which is still a tiny amount, right? And they blow themselves up. So They both die, and there is providence in the fact that in the following fact, right, which is that the crew is going to be sent in a medically induced coma because well, there's a food issue. It's easier to feed them that way, but also there is a violence problem. If you put human beings in a super contained space for an extended period of time, they start to kill each other, right? So we're going to send the people in a coma so they won't do this. We'll wake them up. The robots will wake them up when they get there, right? Now, it turns out that the average person, you put them in a medically induced coma for 4 years, and there's a significant chance they might just die. But there is, according to the book, don't know if this is real science or not, there is a recessive genetic trait which they call coma resistance, which is people with this trait, and this is testable and identifiable genetic trait, they handle comas well. You can put them in and out of comas, and they're much less likely to die, right? So the science officer and this backup science officer are both blown up, and we're trying to launch 5 days from now. And it turns out that that Ryland Grace, who is there doing research and sort of teaching some of the science about these creatures, the astrophages, to the team, turns out, this is the providence, that he also is coma resistant. Right, and by the way, this is a sort of strand of the story that came out of the movie to simplify it. So again, it's just, hey, we got lucky. By the way, we also get lucky because we have just enough time to generate just enough astrophage, because how are we going to travel from one star to the next? It's 11 some odd light years. How are we going to do that? Well, it turns out the astrophage itself releases so much energy that we can use it as our fuel, right? And in fact, we can breed astrophage, and we have just enough time to breed enough astrophage to send a ship out and then send the data back. And by the way, there's a moment where they're trying to figure out the climate challenges and how do we survive the climate challenges on Earth in the meantime, and they have a climate scientist there, and he's talking about how global warming, which is such a catastrophe, actually is buying us some extra time now that we're facing massive global cooling. So there is, and this is one of the examples that the author remarks upon, right, which is there's a coincidence that when Grace arrives in Tau Ceti, there is an alien expedition there also trying to solve the same problem. And so the coincidence is that you had these two civilizations, both of comparable technological levels, so they could both suffer the same problem, diagnose what the problem is, and then get to the system at about the same time, right, is a remarkable coincidence. And of course, they talk about it a little bit in the book in terms of a hypothesis which is called panspermia, which is, hey, even though you look like a 5-limbed, pentagonally symmetric rock, and I look like a hairless ape, we have enough in common that we wonder whether we might have been created by the same processes. We came from the same place somehow. We have some shared background. And there are several others, right? But the point is there are all these, and if you were, one way to read these is you might say, oh man, the storytelling, it relies on coincidence. They got lucky and they got lucky and they got lucky. Oh, okay, that can be your reaction. But the story told you that it was going to be a story about a prayer and about humanity being saved by grace, right? And then it gives you these examples. And I want to read two passages here that kind of really specifically on point, and that I think actually give kind of like the thematic seed to a little bit of a sermon. Like if the book is talking, if the book has a sermon to tell, this is maybe it has two, and this is one of the sermons. Okay. There's a shorter passage and a slightly longer one. So this is Grace, the Ryan Reynolds character, talking to the woman who's sort of bossing everything together, who's given extraordinary power by the world governments. She can just command. She's like the world dictator for Project Hail Mary. And He says, I spent my whole life in the energy sector, so obviously astrophage is really interesting to me. A storage medium like that. Oh no, sorry, this isn't Grace. This is, they go and they're talking to a guy who's he's in prison. Forgive me. He's in prison. He deserves to be in prison. He's an embezzler, but he's an embezzler from his solar energy companies, and he has a sort of proposed technology for them to roll out to solve the problem of getting the astrophage to reproduce enough in time so they can use it to power their ship. Okay, I spent my whole life in the energy sector. Obviously, astrophage is really interesting to me. A storage medium like that, man, if it weren't for what it's doing to the sun, it would be the greatest stroke of luck for humanity in history. Now, that's interesting, but it gets even more explicit. Page 308 here, where the am I reading that right? Hold on. I lie. Page 306. So that's interesting. It gets even more interesting on page 306 here. And here Grace is talking to a character named Steve Hatch, which is actually a little funny because, like, my wife is descended from the Hatches. So, like, this Canadian he's a robot engineer shows up, and you see in the end of the movie the four little ships named after the Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. They deploy and they carry all the findings and the Talmiba back to Earth. That's sort of a truncated storyline. There's more about that in the book. This is the guy who invented actually it's 5 Beatles because, of course, perfectly, his first Beatle is named Pete, which we all know is Pete Best, the often forgotten original drummer of the Beatles. So Steve Hatch is explicitly religious, right? In the conversation where he's trying to sort of pitch the use of these little robots, these little probes, he says, "Do you believe in God? I know it's a personal question. I do. And I think he was pretty awesome to make relativity a thing, don't you? The faster you go, the less time you experience. It's like he's inviting us to explore the universe." And they all kind of, treat him a little bit like he's sort of an oddball. But although later Grace concedes that he's just an absolutely terrific rocket designer, right? So he knows his stuff. They won't concede to this point of view about God. And then he says this. This is Steve Hatch. "Hell yeah. Astrophage coming my way." He leaned forward to me. "Isn't it amazing? Astrophage, I mean, it's like the coolest thing ever. Again, God's just handing us the future." "Cool," I said. "It's an extinction level event. If anything, God's handing us the apocalypse." He shrugged. "I mean, maybe a little. But man, perfect energy storage. Imagine a battery-powered household. Like you have a AA battery, but full of astrophage. That'd last your house about 100,000 years. Imagine buying a car and never having to charge it up. The entire concept of power grids is going to end, and it'll all be clean, renewable energy once we start breeding the stuff on the moon or something. All it needs is sunlight." Grace pushes his point about extinction level event again, and the guy says, "Earth's had 5 mass extinction events in the past, and humans are clever. We'll pull through." So, again, this is a novel. The word Providence is not used. In fact, Grace is the name of the character, but is otherwise not really discussed, right? But the theme of the novel is that there is providence and that the universe is providential, that there is grace, that the universe, that some force in the universe is on our side. And if I were to try to, if you are planning to deliver a sermon this Sunday and you wanted to deliver a sermon on Project Hail Mary, okay, I might start with this Steve Hatch quote, and I might say something like, "Hey, when God gives us amazing blessings, what they look like is really difficult trials," right? So I love this book. I really like this book for being a hard science fiction novel. And I like it even more for being a hard science fiction novel whose theme is this optimistic, that it's the benevolence of the universe, and that we can have a happy future here, and the universe is constantly giving us gifts. And we could have a long conversation about the ways in which that is arguably true, starting with, hey, the second law of thermodynamics teaches us to expect that everything runs down. Order decreases over time. We should expect to see nothing. Why do we see anything at all? Well, something in the universe has caused there to be order, right? And therefore we can exist, we can live, or we can look at the astonishing facts around our own planet, like just randomly, for example, the moon. The moon is exactly far enough away from the Earth and exactly the right size and in exactly the right track that it can periodically exactly cover the sun. That is freakishly unlikely, actually, right? So providence in the universe. The universe has benevolence. There's something in the universe that's on the side of humankind. And I want to make one last comment about this story. And I'm actually I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm not sure ultimately what the interpretation is, right? But so the survival arc for humanity is one thing, but then there's the story of Ryland Grace. What is the story of Ryland Grace? Well, the book and the movie actually phrase them slightly differently. And I don't know why. I think the book was more interesting. The movie, so the theme comes up in the conversation explicitly between Dr. Grace and the alien, right? Whom he calls Rocky. And the movie calls it being brave. So it comes up when Dr. Grace tells the alien that he doesn't expect to go home, that he believes he's here on a one-way mission, not enough fuel to go home. He did it to save people, right? And the alien calls him, brave. It's interesting. The dialogue in the book is a little different. The dialogue in the book has the alien calling Dr. Grace a good human. He said they have they're communicating through a program on a laptop that translates musical sequences of notes, which are the language of the alien, into words, where they're figured out an increasing vocabulary they can share, starting with numbers, right? And they fairly quickly get to pretty good communication back and forth between them, but it's a little pigeon all the time. And the alien says, "You are a good human. You are a good human." I think that's the theme. Is what does it take to be a good human? What does being a good human look like, right? And the alien pronounces Dr. Grace a good human when he learns that he's going to sacrifice himself to save the rest of the humans. Now, again, Dr. Grace wakes up not remembering who he is or anything about how he got here. Over time, he's finding clues, and his memory is being triggered by seeing objects on the ship or having experiences. So he's also remembering. He's remembering more and more. And sort of late in the story, he remembers that he didn't choose to be here at all. He's not a volunteer. That when the two scientists accidentally blew themselves up, he was asked to volunteer, and he refused, and basically made no bones about it and said, "Look, I'm afraid." And they grabbed him and sedated him and put him on the ship. And so, you've been thinking about this character for half the book, maybe half the movie, as, man, this guy was brave, right? And he's doing all the things you'd expect a brave person to do, right? He makes first contact. Interestingly, there's kind of a three-stage, a multi-stage first contact where he identifies the astrophage as alien life. Then he meets and talks to a sentient alien, and of course, I said spoilers. He ends up going to the alien planet, right? And he provides a first contact experience for for Rocky's entire species. But so he's doing that. He's going out trying to solve this problem. And sort of the question is, okay. And by the way, where does this go? He's forced to participate. He doesn't remember it. He's doing the things as if he had volunteered. And then in the end, he chooses to sacrifice himself, he believes, not for humans, having basically done what he can and solved the problem for Earth. He then chooses to sacrifice himself for this non-human species, right? That's the arc. So how do we think about this subplot in terms of theme, right? I mean, we have this one theme, which is the universe is benevolent, and then we have this other theme, which is courage. And I don't know if the story should tell us, hey, everybody has it. No matter how cowardly you think you are, you have it within you to be brave. Right? If only you can get over that first fear. Maybe that's the theme, right? Maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's not really about courage. Maybe the theme is, what is a good human, right? In a universe where there is providence, there can be abundance, where trials can be turned around for our benefit. Maybe we're saying, hey, what is the basically moral action? What is morally good? It is morally good to sacrifice yourself for others, right? I don't know. Let me know what you think the moral of Ryland Grace's personal arc is in the comments. I'd be curious to see what you think. So, fun novel. Fun movie too. The spectacle is great. The sequence where Rocky and Grace have to fly the ship down into the atmosphere of the planet they're calling Adrian. Why are they calling it Adrian? Because Grace has named the alien Rocky. Rocky has a mate. He tells Grace her name, but it's a melody, right? So they have to pick an English word, and of course the answer is Adrian because of the movie Rocky, right? Rocky and Adrian. So they've named the planet Adrian, and they've discovered that there is, or they have reason to think that there is something in the atmosphere that is eating the astrophages. In other words, this one sun is surviving because there is a predator or something like a predator in the clouds of Tau Ceti's Venus equivalent. And so they need to collect some. The ship can't fly low enough in the atmosphere to get it, so they have to fly as low as they can and lower a 5-kilometer bucket, or a 5-kilometer chain with a bucket on the end, right? Terrific sequence in the book. It's a terrific sequence in the movie too. Opportunity for big spectacle and kind of stunts and being smashed along the side of the ship, and yeah. So this is just an example of how, look, the book was fun to read. The book is not as funny. The book is more sciencey. The movie's funnier. It's got some terrific spectacle. Another example of the spectacle they did really well. Well, I'll give a couple more examples. So they did the alien well, right? So it's one thing to describe an alien who is has no visible face, who looks like a 5-legged spider, who sort of moves radially like a wheel, right? But a spider made of rock, and it's another to bring it to life without making it look cheesy or like a Muppet. They did really a terrific job with that. Interestingly, one spectacle. So they really simplified the way the alien eats, because in the book, Rocky is a monostome. That is to say, stoma is Greek for mouth. He has one opening, okay? So he defecates out the same opening that he eats out of, and it's in his underside. And in fact, in the movie, he's happy to eat with Dr. Grace. In the book, he's ashamed. This is a function his culture really doesn't want to share, and Grace convinces him to do it for science, and so then Grace kind of has to watch him first empty himself, right, out of his underside. There's like a hole in the underside of his body, all of the, it's his poop, right, and then he throws all of his food back into the same hole, right? And then I think he passes out to digest it, as I recall. So they sort of degrossed that a little bit, but then added spectacle in I thought it was a pretty cool moment, which is not in the book, where Grace asks near the end to go see the inside of Rocky's spaceship. Now, in the book, he never sees his spaceship. Why? Because Rocky's spaceship is at much higher temperatures, but also much higher pressure and has higher gravity, and basically it would boil and crush him. In the movie, Rocky agrees. Rocky's this stone-made five-legged spider alien is an engineer. So throughout the the two of them are sort of simpatico in personality, which allows them to communicate easily. And he makes stuff like throughout their experience together. He's building little from the beginning, having seen Dr. Grace doing an EVA, walking on the surface of the spaceship. He then, when they meet, he's made a little model so that he hands him a little miniature him, right, spun out of metal. So the interior of the ship is very cool, and this is purely in the movie. It is something like it's very thoughtfully done, very creatively done. It is something like a spider web, but it is also something like the inside of a piano, right? So it's these long strands, and when you touch them, they make musical tones, right? Again, it's not in the book, and it's interesting. I thought it was well done. A very cool way to represent the interior of the spaceship, piloted by a spider whose way of communicating is fundamentally musical. So, yeah. So that's what I have to say. I found this to be a terrific book. I'm very pleased that we're able to, that traditional publishing is still able to put out hard science fiction. I'm surprised that it's able to put out hard science fiction that has a kind of a spiritual subtext to it. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend that you all read the book, but also watch the movie while it's in theaters. I don't think this one will be nearly as enjoyable on the small screen. It's got a lot of great spectacle to it. So that's it for me. This is Dave Butler, and this has been High Lowbrow, because culture matters, and I like having fun.